All right, we'll begin here. Schools across the state continually list a lack of adequate education funding as one of the most challenging aspects of providing every student with a high-quality education. As governor, how will you measure whether schools have adequate funding to meet the goals of our state's education system?
Well, thank you for the question, Stephanie, and I'd like to thank the members of the School Board Association, the administrators, and the South Dakota Education Association, as well as Public Broadcasting for sponsoring this debate. I'd also like to thank the Lieutenant Governor for appearing with me on the stage so that everyone can hear the difference in our approach to education and the future of South Dakota. The question deals with how we measure adequate funding for education in South Dakota. It's a tough question. What we know is what we have now is inadequate, and it's up to the next governor to decide on what we're going to do to change that fundamentally. In South Dakota, when Dennis and Mike took office, 39% of the budget was devoted to K-12 funding in education. Today, 8 years later, 30% is devoted to K-12 funding. That is an arrow pointing down. On the other side is the size of state government. State government, exclusive of K-12, has gone a new state employee every 48 hours, 12,900 employees up to 14,465, a growth of 53% in the state budget. That's an arrow pointing up. The first thing the next governor has to do is switch directions. The arrow involving the size of state government must decline. Dave Knutson and I proposed to the legislature this year a method of doing that, reducing the size of state government 2 to 3% across the board. The arrow that's going down, the devotion of this state to public education has got to turn up. The next governor has to move that 30% back up to 39%.
All right, very good. Again, Lieutenant Governor, as governor, how will you measure whether schools have adequate funding to meet the goals of our state's education system?
Well, South Dakota does need to ensure that all schools have adequate funding to provide an education. In South Dakota, we're very fortunate. We have very good teachers. We have very good parents. Most of our kids come to school ready to learn, and that's very fortunate. Many states aren't in that position. I don't believe we should measure our education adequacy by how much money we're plugging in, but rather by what we're getting out. Our students, among states that measure at least half their students, we have the 5th highest ACT scores in the nation. We have a graduation rate of 80%. That's 10% better than the national average. We can do better, but it's still 10% better than the national average. When our students graduate from high school, we are number 1, number 4 in the nation in terms of students who go on for post-secondary education. Those are all positive outcomes. Now, are there areas we can do better? Yes. Science and math education. The United States, as a developed nation, lags the other developed nations in our achievement of science and math. Are there areas in the job development economy that we can improve in? Yes, we can add to our career and tech ed studies, and I think we want to provide opportunities for our students to be taught at local businesses. So we're committed to additional funding as the funding formula allows.
Okay, very good. We do have some time for a rebuttal, so Senator, if you'd like some time, you have 1 minute.
Thank you, Stephanie. Well, I think what you just heard was the Lieutenant Governor's defense of the status quo and his belief that more of the same will serve this state well. I disagree. I couldn't disagree more. We need to fundamentally change the way we fund education in South Dakota. We have to once again return it to the central priority it was in the Constitution, and it remains in the Constitution today. It is not good enough for South Dakota to be last in how we value educators. It is not good enough for South Dakota to contribute less than any state in the Union to K-12 education as a measure of the state's aid. $4,805 a student is less than any state in the nation contributes. Lieutenant Governor Daugaard points to the outstanding students we have in South Dakota and the great job you do with limited resources. But following that logic, the less we pay our teachers, the better the students would do. We know that's not true. What we'd like to see is, with adequate resources, how well we could do.